Frank Mitchell's fist was already moving. A right cross aimed at Bruce Lee's face. Full power. Full commitment. The punch of an ex-Marine who'd fought in 2 tours of Vietnam and knew how to hurt people. October 14th, 1970. Rosewood Elementary School, Los Angeles. Principal's office. 20 people watching. Teachers, parents, staff. Frank's son Tommy sitting in the corner, 5 years old, learning what his father thought masculinity looked like. Bruce's son Brandon, sitting across from him, also 5, learning what his father thought strength meant. Frank had called Bruce's parenting soft, had said Bruce was teaching Brandon to be a coward, had demanded that Bruce teach his son to fight back like a man. So Bruce had made an offer: hit me as hard as you can. Show my son what being a man looks like. And now Frank was trying. 2 hours earlier, Bruce Lee sat cross-legged on the training mats at a school in Chinatown, watching a private student practice chi saw, the Wing Chun sticky hands sensitivity drill. The student was a businessman in his 40s, tense, trying too hard, muscling the technique instead of feeling it. Stop thinking, Bruce said quietly. Feel. The drill is called sticky hands, not thinking hands. Your mind is 3 steps behind your body. By the time you decide to move, your opponent has already moved. You have to respond instinctively. The student nodded, tried again, still too tense. Bruce stood, demonstrated. His hands touched the student's forearms lightly, barely any pressure. Feel the tension in my arms. Feel where my weight is. Feel my intention before I move. That's sensitivity. That's what this drill teaches. Not technique. Awareness. The phone rang in Bruce's small office adjacent to the training floor. Bruce glanced at the clock on the wall. 2 p.m. He wasn't expecting any calls. Linda knew he taught until 3 on Wednesdays. Brandon was in school. Shannon was with Linda's mother for the afternoon. Excuse me, Bruce said to his student. Keep practicing. Focus on feeling, not forcing. Bruce walked to his office, picked up the phone on the 3rd ring. Yun Fein Gong Fu Institute. Bruce. Linda's voice, tight with worry. The school called. Brandon's in the principal's office. There was an incident with another boy. They want you there immediately. They said it's serious. Bruce felt his stomach tighten. Is he hurt? They didn't say. Just that they need you there as soon as possible. I'm on my way too, but I'm in Pasadena. You're closer. Can you go now? I'm leaving now. Which school? He knew the answer. Brandon was in kindergarten at Rosewood Elementary in West Los Angeles, 20 minutes away if traffic was light, but his mind was racing ahead, trying to understand what could have happened. Rosewood. Bruce, he sounded upset on the phone. The principal. Like something serious happened. Please hurry. I will. I'm leaving right now. Bruce hung up, walked back to the training floor. His student was still practicing chi saw against the wooden dummy, trying to feel instead of force. I have to leave. Family emergency. We'll continue next week. Keep practicing what we worked on today. Remember, sensitivity first, technique second. The student bowed. Bruce grabbed his jacket, locked the front door of the school behind him, jogged to his car parked on the street. A blue Porsche 911 purchased 6 months ago after a good year of teaching. He slid into the driver's seat, started the engine, pulled into traffic. As he drove west toward Rosewood Elementary, Bruce's mind worked through possibilities. Brandon was gentle, artistic, liked drawing more than roughhousing, preferred quiet activities to loud ones. At home, he'd watch Bruce train, imitate the movements carefully, seriously, with focus beyond his 5 years. But he'd never shown aggression, never started fights, never used the techniques Bruce taught him outside of training. Had Brandon gotten into a fight? That seemed unlikely. Had another child hurt him? That seemed more probable. Brandon was smaller than most kids his age. Half Chinese, half white, in a predominantly white school. He stood out. Bruce had been worried about that. Had enrolled Brandon in Rosewood despite the demographics because the school had a good reputation, small class sizes, committed teachers. But he'd known it might be difficult for Brandon socially. Bruce had been teaching Brandon basic martial arts since he was 3. Not to fight, to develop body awareness, discipline, confidence, control. The lessons were always gentle, always focused on form, never on aggression. And Bruce had emphasized one principle above all: Fighting is the last resort. Walking away from fights takes more courage than staying. Never use what I'm teaching you unless you have no other choice. And even then, only to protect yourself or someone who can't protect themselves. Never to hurt someone because you're angry or scared or want to prove you're tough. Understand? Brandon always nodded seriously. I understand, Dad. And Bruce believed he did. Brandon was mature for his age. Thoughtful. The kind of child who asked questions adults didn't expect from 5-year-olds. Why do we bow before training? What does it mean to be humble? If you're really strong, does that mean you don't have to prove it? Bruce loved those questions. Loved that his son was thinking about martial arts philosophically, not just physically. That was the goal. Raising a child who understood that real strength was internal, not external. That violence was a tool for people who lack better tools. That walking away from conflict was often braver than engaging with it. But had someone at school challenged that? Had another child or a teacher misunderstood Brandon's gentleness as weakness? Had Brandon been put in a position where he had to choose between defending himself and following his father's teachings? Bruce pulled into the Rosewood Elementary parking lot at 2:32 p.m. The school was a single-story building, 1950s construction, sprawling across 2 acres. Palm trees lined the walkways. A playground with swings and slides sat empty. Classes were still in session. The administrative office was at the front of the building, glass doors with Rosewood Elementary, where every child matters stenciled in blue letters. Bruce parked, got out, walked quickly to the entrance. Inside, the office was small, a reception desk, chairs along one wall, a hallway leading to private offices. A secretary in her 50s looked up when Bruce entered. I'm Bruce Lee. I received a call about my son Brandon. I was told to come immediately. The secretary's expression shifted, recognition, then sympathy. Yes, Mr. Lee. Principal Hayes is expecting you. They're in her office. 3rd door on the left. Is my son all right? He's not injured, but there was an incident. Principal Hayes will explain. Bruce walked down the hallway. 3rd door on the left was partially open. He could hear voices inside, adults talking in low, tense tones. He knocked lightly. Come in, a woman's voice called. Bruce pushed the door open. The office was larger than he'd expected. A desk with papers and files, bookshelves along one wall, windows overlooking the playground, and 7 people crowded into the space. Principal Margaret Hayes sat behind the desk. Early 50s, gray hair, professional demeanor, but clearly stressed. 2 teachers stood near the windows, a young woman in her 30s, an older man in his 60s. And sitting in chairs facing the desk were 4 people Bruce didn't know. Except one. Sitting in the chair closest to the door, head down, hands folded in his lap, was Brandon. Bruce's heart broke seeing his son's posture. Withdrawn. Ashamed. Whatever had happened, Brandon thought he'd done something wrong. Bruce crossed the room, knelt in front of Brandon. Hey, buddy. Are you okay? Brandon looked up. His eyes were red. He'd been crying. But he wasn't injured. No visible marks, no bruises. He nodded silently. Did someone hurt you? Brandon shook his head. Then what happened? Before Brandon could answer, Principal Hayes stood. Mr. Lee, thank you for coming so quickly. I'm Margaret Hayes, the principal here. We have a situation that needs to be addressed. Perhaps we should let the children wait outside while the adults talk. I'd like to hear from my son first. Brandon, can you tell me what happened? Brandon's voice was small. Tommy pushed me. At recess, I fell down. I got up and walked away. I didn't push him back. But Tommy's dad is mad at me. He says I should have pushed Tommy back. He says I'm... Brandon's voice caught. He looked at his father with confusion and hurt. He says I'm a coward. Bruce felt anger flash hot in his chest. Forced it down. Kept his voice calm. You're not a coward. You did exactly what I taught you. Walking away was the right choice. I'm proud of you. A voice from across the room, loud and harsh. That's the problem right there. You're teaching your kid to be a victim, to let people push him around. That's not how you raise a man. Bruce stood, turned to face the speaker, and saw Frank Mitchell for the first time. Frank was massive. 6'2", easily 220 pounds, all muscle and aggression. He sat in a chair that looked too small for him, wearing jeans and a flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms scarred and tattooed. His face was weathered, hard, the face of someone who'd seen violence and returned it. His jaw was set. His eyes were hostile. And sitting next to him, in a chair that matched Brandon's, was a boy who looked like a miniature version of Frank, bigger than Brandon, older, maybe aggressive, even sitting still. "Are you Brandon's father?" Frank asked. It wasn't really a question. It was a challenge. "I am. Bruce Lee." Frank didn't stand, didn't offer a handshake, just looked Bruce up and down, dismissing him with his eyes. "Yeah, I've heard of you. The karate guy from that TV show. Well, maybe you should spend less time on TV and more time teaching your kid how to stand up for himself." Principal Hayes stepped in quickly. "Mr. Mitchell, please. Let's keep this civil. Mr. Lee, I apologize for the tension. Let me explain the situation. Over the past few weeks, there have been several incidents between Brandon and Tommy, Mr. Mitchell's son. Tommy has been aggressive toward Brandon, pushing, name-calling, taking Brandon's lunch. Our teachers have documented these incidents. Today, during recess, Tommy pushed Brandon hard enough to knock him down. Brandon got up and walked away without retaliating. Tommy's teacher brought both boys to my office. I called both families, and now we're here to address the situation." Bruce processed this carefully. "You're saying Tommy has been bullying my son for weeks, and today it escalated to physical assault, and you called me because Brandon didn't fight back." I called both families to address the ongoing conflict. There's no conflict. There's one child assaulting another child. That's not conflict. That's bullying. Frank leaned forward in his chair. "Bullying? My kid's 5 years old. 5-year-olds don't bully. They roughhouse. They test each other. That's what boys do. Your kid's just too soft to handle it. Your son pushed my son to the ground. That's assault, not roughhousing. It's a push. Kids push each other. It's not a big deal unless you make it a big deal. The problem is your kid didn't push back. He ran away. That's what's wrong here. You're teaching him to run instead of stand up for himself." Bruce's voice remained calm, controlled. "I'm teaching him to walk away from unnecessary violence. That takes more courage than hitting back." Frank laughed. It was harsh, mocking. "Courage? Walking away is courage? That's the most backwards thing I've ever heard. Courage is standing your ground, fighting back, not letting people push you around. That's what I'm teaching my boy. That's what my father taught me. That's what makes you a man. Your definition of manhood is aggression. My definition of manhood is not being a doormat, not being a victim, not running away like a coward when someone challenges you. That's what I learned in the Marines. That's what I learned in Vietnam. You don't back down. You don't show weakness. You stand your ground and you fight. That's survival. That's strength. That's what real men do." The room had gone very quiet. The teachers looked uncomfortable. Principal Hayes looked like she wanted to intervene, but didn't know how. Tommy looked at his father with wide eyes, absorbing every word. And Brandon looked at Bruce, waiting to see what his father would say. Bruce chose his words carefully. "Mr. Mitchell, I respect your military service. I understand you've experienced combat and survived by being aggressive. But we're not in Vietnam. We're in an elementary school. And these are 5-year-old children. Teaching them that violence is the first response to conflict isn't preparing them for life. It's teaching them that might makes right. That's not strength. That's just aggression." Frank stood up, all 6'2" of him, all 220 pounds, stepped toward Bruce, closing the distance, using his size to intimidate. "You're saying I don't know how to raise my son? You're saying I'm wrong? You, a guy who teaches karate dances, you're going to tell me, a Marine who served 2 tours, what strength is? That's rich. That's really rich. I'm saying our children are watching us right now, watching how we handle disagreement. And you're teaching your son that when someone disagrees with you, you use size and aggression to shut them down. Is that really what you want him to learn?" Frank's face flushed red. "Don't you dare analyze me. Don't you dare try to make this about me. This is about your kid being too weak to defend himself. This is about you teaching him to run away instead of fight back. In my family, we don't raise cowards. We raise men. And, look, I'm just going to say what everyone's thinking. This," he gestured at Bruce, "this is what's wrong with this generation. Fathers teaching their sons to be soft, to avoid conflict, to run away instead of stand up. In my day, if someone pushed you, you push back. That's how boys learn respect. That's how they learn strength. But now we've got fathers teaching their kids that walking away is courageous. That violence is never the answer. That real men don't fight. And you know what you get? You get weak kids, victim kids, kids who grow up getting pushed around because they never learned to push back. That's what this man is doing to his son. He's failing him. He's teaching him to be a coward. And someone needs to say it. The words hung in the air. The public accusation. The judgment. Frank had just called Bruce a failure as a father. In front of teachers, administrators, other parents. In front of Tommy. In front of Brandon. Bruce looked at his son. Brandon's eyes were filling with tears. Not from being hurt. From shame. From confusion. From watching his father be attacked and not knowing if what Frank said was true. Was Dad wrong? Was I supposed to fight back? Am I a coward? And Bruce made a decision. Not to defend himself with words. Not to argue philosophy. Not to explain that Frank's worldview was shaped by trauma and misapplied to childhood. Words wouldn't reach Frank. Words wouldn't teach Brandon what he needed to learn. Words wouldn't show everyone in this room what real strength looked like. Only action would do that. Bruce took a breath. Let the anger drain away. Let the calm settle over him like still water. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, controlled, absolutely certain. Mr. Mitchell, I understand you believe fighting back is what makes someone a man. That walking away is cowardice. You made your position very clear. So let me make you an offer. Frank crossed his arms. An offer? You want my son to learn how to fight back. How to be a man according to your definition. Okay, teach him. Right now. Show him what real strength looks like. Show him what you believe he should have done when your son pushed him. What are you talking about? Bruce stepped into the center of the room. Away from Brandon. Away from the desk. Creating space. Hit me. As hard as you can. Full power. Full commitment. I won't hit you back. I won't defend myself with violence. I'll just stand here, and I'll show you, and show both our sons, what real strength is. What real control looks like. You're a Marine. A combat vétéran. You know how to fight. So fight. Show Brandon what you think he should learn. Show Tommy what you're teaching him. Show everyone in this room what your definition of masculinity looks like. And then I'll show everyone mine. The room went dead silent. Every person frozen. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. A parent was challenging another parent to hit him. In a principal's office. In front of children. In front of staff. Principal Hayes found her voice. Mr. Lee, I absolutely cannot allow. This isn't a fight, Bruce said calmly. This is a demonstration. Mr. Mitchell believes violence makes you strong. I believe restraint makes you strong. He wants my son to learn to fight back. I want my son to learn when not to fight. Let's find out whose philosophy works. Let's let both our sons see the answer. One punch. His best punch. I won't retaliate. I'll just show him, show everyone what I've been trying to teach. That real power is control. That real courage is choosing not to use violence when you easily could. That real strength is knowing you could destroy someone and choosing mercy instead. Bruce turned to Brandon. His voice was gentle now, loving. Brandon, watch carefully. Watch what your dad does. This is why I taught you to walk away. This is why I told you fighting is the last resort. This is why choosing not to hurt someone is braver than hurting them. Watch, learn, and understand that what you did today, walking away, that was the strongest thing you could have done. Brandon stared at his father with wide, terrified eyes. Bruce turned back to Frank. So, are you going to teach my son what you believe? Are you going to show him that real men hit back? Go ahead. I'm standing here, undefended, not fighting back. Show everyone what happens when someone uses violence. Show everyone what your strength looks like. And then I'll show everyone what mine looks like. Frank stared at Bruce, processing what just happened. This small Chinese guy, 5'7", maybe 135, soaking wet, just challenge him to throw a punch. In front of witnesses. In front of his son. In front of Bruce's son. Frank's pride wouldn't let him back down. His entire worldview was based on the idea that real men don't back down from challenges. That walking away is cowardice. If he refused now, he'd look weak. He'd look like everything he'd just accused Bruce of being. He'd contradict his own philosophy in front of Tommy, in front of everyone. But if he hit Bruce, If he actually threw a punch at someone who wasn't defending themselves, wouldn't that make him the aggressor? Wouldn't that prove Bruce's point? That violence is what people use when they don't have better options? Frank looked around the room. The teachers were staring at him. Principal Hayes was staring at him. Tommy was staring at him, waiting to see what Dad would do. Frank's face hardened. Decision made. You asked for this. You wanted this. Everyone here is a witness. The man asked me to hit him. That's his choice. Fine. You want to learn a lesson about what real strength is? I'll teach you. Mrs. Morrison, Tommy's kindergarten teacher, stepped forward. Mr. Mitchell, please don't do this. This isn't appropriate. This isn't. Frank cut her off. The man challenged me. In front of my son. In front of everyone. I'm not backing down. That would teach Tommy the wrong lesson. Would teach him that you can back down when things get serious. No. If someone challenges you, you answer. That's what men do. Bruce remained in the center of the room. Hands at his sides. Relaxed. Vulnerable. Completely open. His stance was neutral. Feet shoulder-width apart. Weight evenly distributed. No tension in his shoulders or arms. He looked like someone waiting for a bus. Not like someone about to be hit by a trained combat veteran. Whenever you're ready, Bruce said quietly. Show everyone what you believe. Frank rolled his shoulders. Old training reflexes activating. 2 tours in Vietnam. Hand-to-hand combat training. Brawls and dive bars after he came home. He knew how to hurt people. Knew how to throw a punch that would drop someone. He assumed a fighting stance. Weight on his back foot. Right hand pulled back. Left hand forward for balance. Classic boxing stance, modified by military combatives training. Efficient. Powerful. Dangerous. The room held its breath. 20 people watching. Knowing this was wrong. Knowing someone should stop this. But frozen. Unable to intervene. Unable to look away. Tommy watched his father with a mixture of excitement and fear. This is what Dad does. This is what being strong looks like. Hit people who challenge you. Show them you're not weak. Brandon watched his father with pure terror. Dad, move. Dad, defend yourself. Dad, don't just stand there. But Bruce didn't move. Just stood there. Calm. Still. Waiting. Frank committed. Weight transferred forward. Hips rotated. Shoulder extended. Right fist launched toward Bruce's face. Full power. Full speed. The kind of punch that breaks jaws. The kind of punch learned in combat. The kind of punch thrown when you mean to hurt someone. A right cross. Aimed at Bruce Lee's head. Fast. Committed. Violent. And Bruce moved. Not much. Just enough. 3 inches to the left. His head shifting off the center line. His body remaining still. Just his head. Just that slight movement. Minimal. Economical. Efficient. Frank's fist passed so close to Bruce's face that everyone in the room gasped. So close that the wind from the punch disturbed Bruce's hair. So close that it seemed impossible Bruce hadn't been hit. But he hadn't. The punch missed. By millimeters. By nothing. By the smallest margin of error possible. Frank's momentum carried him forward. The punch he'd committed so much power to, missing threw off his balance. He stumbled. 1 step. 2 steps. His center of gravity wrong. His structure compromised. And Bruce's hands moved. Not strikes. Not hits. Just positioning. His right hand touched Frank's extended arm. Lightly. Like a feather landing on a branch. His left hand touched Frank's shoulder. The balance point. The fulcrum. Where all of Frank's weight was pivoting. Bruce didn't push. Didn't pull. Didn't force anything. Just guided. Redirected. Used Frank's own momentum. Used Frank's commitment to the punch. Used physics. Used leverage. Used 30 years of martial arts refinement distilled into effortless technique. Frank's world turned sideways. One moment he was punching. The next moment he was falling. The ground coming up to meet him. His hands reaching out instinctively to break the fall. His face hitting the carpet of Principal Hayes' office with a soft thud. And then pressure. Bruce's knee against Frank's back. Light pressure. Not painful. Not violent. Just there. Present. Controlling. Frank tried to move his arms. Couldn't. Bruce's hands had positioned them. One arm behind Frank's back, the other pinned beneath his body, in a way that made movement impossible without cooperation. This wasn't a joint lock. Wasn't a submission hold that caused pain. It was just control. Pure structural control. Frank could breathe, could speak, could think, but couldn't move, couldn't escape, couldn't do anything except lie there and feel how completely he'd been neutralized. It had taken less than 2 seconds. From Frank's punch to Frank face down on the floor. 2 seconds. Maybe less. Maybe 1.5. The room hadn't even had time to react, to gasp, to process what they'd seen. Now they stared in absolute silence. At Bruce Lee kneeling on Frank Mitchell's back. At Frank, massive, aggressive, violent Frank, completely immobilized. At the complete reversal of what they'd expected. Everyone had thought, if Frank connected, Bruce would be hurt. If Frank missed, they'd grapple. It would be a struggle, a contest, a fight. But it wasn't a fight. It was a lesson, given in 2 seconds. Undeniable. Bruce leaned down. His voice was quiet. Only Frank could hear. This is real strength, Mr. Mitchell. I could hurt you right now. Could break your arm with minimal pressure. Could strike pressure points that would leave you unconscious in seconds. Could do permanent damage. But I'm not going to. Because I don't need to. Because control is more powerful than violence. Because being able to destroy someone and choosing not to, that's what makes you strong. Not hitting, not hurting, not proving you're tougher than someone else. Choosing mercy even when you have power. That's what real men do. That's what I'm teaching my son. That's what you should be teaching yours. Bruce released Frank. Stood, extended his hand to help Frank up. Frank lay there for a moment. Not because he couldn't move. Because he didn't understand what had just happened. One moment he'd thrown his best punch. The next moment he was on the ground. He hadn't felt impact. Hadn't felt pain. Just loss of control. Complete, effortless loss of control to someone half his size. Finally, Frank pushed himself to his knees. Didn't take Bruce's offer hand. Couldn't. His pride was already too damaged. He stood on his own. Brushed carpet fibers off his shirt. His face was red. Not from exertion. From humiliation. Bruce turned to address the room. His voice was louder now. Teaching voice. Making sure everyone understood. Mr. Mitchell just tried to hurt me with full force. A trained Marine. A combat vétéran. Someone who knows how to fight. Who's fought in a war. Who survived by being aggressive and violent. And I didn't hit him once. Didn't strike him. Didn't hurt him. Didn't cause him pain. I just controlled the situation. Redirected his violence. Showed that his force was ineffective when I refused to engage with it. That's what I teach my son. That violence is a tool for people who don't have skill. That real mastery is handling conflict without causing harm. That walking away takes more courage than fighting back because it requires controlling yourself, which is harder than controlling someone else. Bruce looked at Brandon. His son was staring at him with wide, shocked eyes, still processing what he'd just witnessed. Brandon, do you understand? You walked away from Tommy today. You didn't hit him back even though you could have. I've taught you enough that you could have hurt him if you wanted to. But you chose not to. That wasn't cowardice. That was strength. Real strength. The strength to know you have power and choose not to use it. The strength to walk away from fights you could win because winning the fight isn't as important as avoiding unnecessary violence. I'm proud of you. So proud. You did exactly what I taught you. And what you did took more courage than hitting back would have. Brandon's eyes filled with tears, but not sad tears. Relief tears. Validation tears. His dad wasn't disappointed. His dad was proud. What he'd done was right. Not wrong. Right. Bruce turned to Tommy. The boy was sitting in his chair, staring at his father on the floor, confused and scared. His whole worldview was cracking. Dad was supposed to be strong. Was supposed to win fights. Was supposed to show that hitting back is what you do. But Dad had lost. Had been on the ground in 2 seconds. And the Chinese man who Dad said was teaching weakness. That man had won without even hitting. Tommy, Bruce said gently, kneeling so he was at the boy's eye level. Your father loves you very much. He's trying to protect you by teaching you to be tough. By teaching you to fight back. But Tommy, fighting doesn't protect you. It just creates more violence. More pain. Real protection comes from knowing you're strong enough that you don't need to prove it. From being so confident in yourself that other people's challenges don't threaten you. From having so much control that you can choose mercy instead of violence. That's what real strength is. And that's what your father was trying to teach you. He just didn't know how to say it without violence. But now he's learning too. We're all learning. Frank stood in the center of Principal Hayes's office, chest heaving, face flushed with humiliation and confusion. His right hand was still clenched in a fist, the fist that had thrown a full power punch and hit nothing but air. The fist that had committed every ounce of his strength to hurting someone and been rendered completely ineffective in less than 2 seconds. He stared at Bruce Lee, this small man, this Chinese guy who taught karate or kung fu or whatever it was. This person Frank had dismissed as soft, as weak, as someone teaching his son to be a victim. And Frank had just learned, vociferably, in front of 20 witnesses, that every assumption he'd made was wrong. What? Frank's voice came out hoarse. He cleared his throat. Tried again. What the hell did you just do? Bruce's expression was calm, patient, like a teacher waiting for a student to understand a difficult concept. J'ai connu the art of intercepting. I didn't fight you, Mr. Mitchell. I just showed you that fighting isn't necessary. That control is possible without violence. That force only works when your opponent participates. I refused to participate, so your force had nowhere to go. You made me look like a fool. No, you volunteered to throw a punch at someone who wasn't fighting back. That was your choice. I just demonstrated that violence doesn't work when your opponent understands it better than you do. When your opponent has spent 30 years studying not just how to fight, but how to avoid fighting. How to neutralize aggression without returning it. That's the difference between what I do and what you do. You fight. I intercept. You attack. I redirect. You use force. I use physics. Frank opened his mouth to respond, then closed it. He didn't have words. His entire worldview was built on a simple equation. Strength equals the ability to hurt people. Size matters. Aggression wins. If you can take a punch and give one back harder, you're a man. If you can dominate someone physically, you're powerful. If you back down from a fight, you're weak. But Bruce had just shown him a different equation. One where size didn't matter. Where aggression was a liability, not an asset. Where the person who refused to engage held all the power. Where control was superior to force. And Frank didn't know what to do with that information. It contradicted everything he'd built his identity on. Everything he'd survived on. Everything he'd been teaching Tommy. Principal Hayes finally found her voice. Her face was pale. Her hands were shaking slightly. Gentlemen, what just happened? That cannot happen again. This is a school. This is a place for children to learn, not for adults to engage in physical confrontations. I should call the police. I should have both of you removed from this building. But she paused, looked at Frank still standing there stunned, looked at Bruce standing calm and centered. But I think something important just happened. Something both our students needed to see. So I'm not going to call the police. I'm not going to have either of you removed. But we need to address the original issue. Tommy has been bullying Brandon. That behavior needs to stop. And we need to make sure both children understand what they witnessed here today. Frank turned to look at Tommy. His son was sitting in the chair, small and scared, watching his father with eyes that held confusion and something else. Disappointment? Fear? Tommy had watched his dad lose. Had watched his dad get put on the ground by someone smaller, quieter, calmer. Had watched everything Dad said about strength get contradicted in 2 seconds. Tommy, Frank said. His voice was rough. Come here. Tommy stood up slowly, walked over to his father, stood in front of him, looking up. Did you push that kid? Brandon. Did you push him down today? Tommy nodded, not meeting his father's eyes. Yes, sir. Why? Because he's weird. Because the other kids laugh at him. Because he won't fight back. Because you said Tommy's voice got smaller. You said if someone doesn't fight back, it means they're weak. And you can push weak people around. That's what you said. Frank felt something crack inside his chest. Not physical, emotional. The realization that his son had been listening to everything Frank said. Had been internalizing Frank's anger, Frank's aggression, Frank's belief that violence was strength. And Tommy was becoming a 5-year-old version of Frank. A bully. An aggressor. Someone who hurt people smaller than him, because that's what Dad taught him being strong meant. I was wrong, Frank said. The words hurt coming out. Admitting error wasn't something Frank did. Admitting weakness wasn't allowed. But looking at his son, at what he was creating, Frank understood he had to say it. What I taught you was wrong. You don't put your hands on people who aren't fighting you. You don't use your size to hurt people smaller than you. That's not strength. That's bullying. And his voice cracked, I taught you that. I made you think that was okay. That was right. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. The room was silent. Everyone's staring. Frank Mitchell was apologizing. Frank Mitchell, who never backed down, never admitted fault, never showed vulnerability, was standing in front of his 5-year-old son and apologizing. Tommy's eyes filled with tears. But you said real men fight back. You said walking away is for cowards. I said a lot of things, and most of them were wrong. I was angry, Tommy. Still am angry. About the war. About things that happened over there that I can't forget. About feeling like the world doesn't make sense anymore. And I took that anger and I told myself it made me strong. Told myself that being aggressive meant I was a man. Told myself that violence was the answer to everything. And I taught you those things because I didn't know better. But Mr. Lee just showed me better. Showed me that real strength looks different than I thought. That real men don't need to prove they're tough. That real courage is choosing not to fight when you could. I should have learned that 20 years ago. I'm learning it now, and you're going to learn it too. Frank turned to Brandon. The boy was still sitting in his chair. Linda, Bruce's wife, had arrived at some point during the confrontation and was standing behind Brandon with her hands on his shoulders, protective and supportive. Brandon, Frank said, his voice steadier now. I owe you an apology. A big one. My son hurt you, pushed you down, bullied you, and I made excuses for him. Told myself boys will be boys. Told myself you should have fought back. But you did the right thing. Walking away. Not hitting Tommy, even though you could have. Your dad taught you something my dad never taught me. Something I never learned in the Marines. Something I should have learned before I had a son of my own. That being strong means knowing when not to fight. That real courage is controlling yourself, not controlling other people through fear. I'm sorry Tommy hurt you. I'm sorry I called your dad names. I'm sorry I said you were a coward. You're not. You're braver than I've ever been. You did what I couldn't do, walked away from a fight. That's strength. Real strength. Brandon looked at his father. Bruce nodded. Permission to respond. Brandon's voice was small but clear. It's okay, Mr. Mitchell. Tommy can stop pushing me now. We can be friends instead. If he wants. Tommy looked at Brandon. These two boys, 5 years old, navigating the complicated adult emotions swirling around them with simple child wisdom. I want to be friends. I'm sorry I pushed you and called you names. That was mean. It's okay. You don't have to be mean. You can be nice and still be strong. My dad's really strong, but he's nice too. Can you teach me how to do that? How to be strong without being mean? Brandon looked at Bruce again. Bruce smiled. Sure, we can teach you. Both of you can learn together. That's how it should be. Mrs. Morrison, Tommy's teacher, stepped forward. She'd been standing near the window, watching everything unfold, her face showing a mixture of shock and something else. Hope, maybe. Recognition that something broken might be getting fixed. Mr. Mitchell, she said carefully, I've documented Tommy's behavior for weeks. The aggression, the bullying, the pattern of targeting smaller children. I wanted to talk to you about it, but she paused, choosing her words. I was concerned about how you'd react. But what I witnessed here today makes me think you might be open to getting some help. For both of you, there are family counseling services, specifically for veterans dealing with reintegration, with PTSD, with anger issues, with the challenges of parenting after combat. Would you be open to that? Frank's first instinct was to reject the suggestion. Counseling was for weak people, for people who couldn't handle their problems on their own, for people who needed someone to hold their hand and tell them everything would be okay. Frank didn't need that. Frank could handle his own problems. Except he couldn't. That's what today had shown him. He'd been handling his problems by teaching his son to be violent, by projecting his trauma onto a 5-year-old child, by creating a miniature version of himself, angry, aggressive, unable to process emotion except through force. Yeah, Frank said quietly. Yeah, I'd be open to that. I don't want Tommy growing up like me. Don't want him carrying the kind of anger I carry. Don't want him thinking violence is the answer to everything. He deserves better than that. I need to be better than that. Mrs. Morrison nodded, pulled a card from her purse, handed it to Frank. This is a counseling center that specializes in veteran family services. They've helped a lot of fathers who came back from Vietnam, helped them process what they experienced, learn healthier ways to parent, to express emotion, to be present for their children without the anger and aggression. Call them. Make an appointment. It'll be good for both of you. Frank took the card, looked at it, put it in his pocket. I'll call them. Tomorrow. I promise. Bruce had been watching this exchange silently. Now he spoke, his voice gentle. Mr. Mitchell, what you're doing right now, admitting you need help, committing to getting it, that takes real courage. More courage than throwing a punch. More courage than fighting in a war. Because you're facing yourself, facing your mistakes, facing the damage you've done to your son, and you're choosing to change. That's the hardest fight there is. The fight against your own patterns, your own trauma, your own belief systems. And it's the most important fight, because winning that fight means Tommy grows up different, grows up healthier, grows up knowing that real men ask for help when they need it. That real strength is vulnerability. That real courage is admitting you were wrong. Frank looked at Bruce, really looked at him, not with dismissal or hostility or superiority, with respect. How did you learn all this? How do you know this stuff? I spent 30 years studying martial arts. But more importantly, I spent 30 years studying myself, understanding my ego, my need to prove myself, my fear of looking weak, my desire to dominate. And I learned that all those impulses, they don't make you strong. They make you fragile, because your sense of self depends on external validation, on winning fights, on being tougher than other people, on never backing down. That's exhausting, and it's unsustainable. Real strength comes from within, from knowing who you are regardless of whether you win or lose, from being so confident in yourself that other people's challenges don't threaten you, from having nothing to prove. That's freedom. That's power. And that's what I'm trying to teach my son. Not how to fight, how to be free from the need to fight. Frank was quiet for a long moment, processing. His whole adult life had been about proving he was tough, proving he could take whatever life threw at him and hit back harder, proving he wasn't weak. And Bruce was saying all of that, all of Frank's identity, was actually weakness disguised as strength. I misjudged you, Frank said finally. Misjudged your parenting. Misjudged what you're teaching your son. Misjudged what strength means. I've been wrong about a lot of things. And I thank you for not hurting me. You could have. I know that now. But you didn't. And that taught me more than any punch could have. Taught me that mercy is more powerful than violence. That control is more impressive than force. That real men don't need to destroy people to prove they're men. I got a lot to learn, a lot to unlearn. But I'm going to try. I'm going to be better. For Tommy. For myself. Bruce extended his hand again. This time Frank took it. They shook, not as adversaries, as two fathers trying to do right by their sons. Both of them learning, both of them growing. Principal Hayes cleared her throat. I think we've reached a resolution. Tommy, you're going to apologize to Brandon properly, and you're going to stop bullying him and any other students. Understood? Yes, ma'am. And Mr. Mitchell, I appreciate your willingness to seek counseling. Mrs. Morrison will follow up with you about Tommy's behavior. We'll give him a fresh start. But if the aggression continues, there will be consequences. This school has a zero-tolerance policy for bullying. It won't continue, Frank said. I promise. We're going to work on this. Together. Linda Lee finally spoke. She'd been standing silently behind Brandon, watching everything unfold, her face showing the complex emotions of a mother who just watched her husband put himself in danger to teach their son a lesson. Brandon, honey, are you okay? Brandon nodded. I'm okay, Mom. Dad didn't get hurt. And Tommy said he's sorry. And we're going to be friends now. You're very brave. You know that? Walking away from the fight today. That took real courage. Dad said that too. But I was scared. I didn't feel brave. Being scared and doing the right thing anyway. That's what brave means. Brave isn't not being scared. Brave is being scared and still choosing kindness. Still choosing to walk away. Still choosing not to hurt someone even when they hurt you. You did that. And I'm so proud of you. Bruce knelt down in front of Brandon again. Father and son, I. You asked me this morning why I teach you martial arts if I don't want you to fight. Do you remember? Brandon nodded. I teach you so you'll have the confidence to walk away. So you'll know that if you had to fight, you could. But knowing you could means you don't have to prove it. You can choose peace. You can choose mercy. You can choose to be strong without being violent. That's the whole point. Not to make you into a fighter. To make you into someone who's so secure in his own strength that he doesn't need to fight. Today, you proved you learned that lesson. You are strong, Brandon. Stronger than most adults. And I'm so proud of you. Brandon hugged his father, small arms around Bruce's neck. Bruce held his son, feeling the weight of responsibility, the weight of being a role model, the weight of knowing that every action he took taught Brandon what kind of man to become. Over Brandon's shoulder, Bruce saw Tommy watching. The boy looked uncertain, lost. His father had just admitted everything he'd been teaching Tommy was wrong. Tommy's whole worldview had been upended in 5 minutes. He needed guidance, needed a new model of what strength looked like. Tommy, Bruce said, still holding Brandon, would you and your dad like to visit my school sometime? I teach martial arts. But more importantly, I teach discipline, control, how to be strong without hurting people, how to use your body in ways that build confidence instead of aggression. Your dad's right that you should learn how to defend yourself. But you should also learn when not to defend yourself, when to walk away, when to choose peace. I think both of you could benefit from that training. What do you think? Tommy looked at Frank. Frank nodded slowly. I think that's a good idea. I think we both need to learn what real strength looks like. And Mr. Lee seems to understand that better than anyone I've ever met. Then come by this weekend. Saturday morning, 10 a.m. June Fan Gung Fu Institute in Chinatown. I'll teach you both some basics. We'll start with breathing, with being present in your body, with understanding that martial arts isn't about fighting. It's about knowing yourself. Both of you are welcome. No charge. Consider it my contribution to helping your family heal. Frank's eyes got wet. He blinked hard, forcing back tears. Thank you. Really, thank you. I don't deserve your help after what I said, after what I called you, after everything. Everyone deserves help. Everyone deserves the chance to grow. You're a father who wants to be better for his son. That's enough. That's what matters. We'll help you. Both of you. Together. Principal Hayes looked at the clock on her wall. 4:15 p.m. They've been in this office for over an hour. The entire confrontation, resolution, and reconciliation had taken longer than the school day. Other teachers had poked their heads in periodically, curious about the voices, about the tension, but Principal Hayes had waved them away. This needed to happen, needed to play out fully. I think we're done here, Principal Hayes said. Unless anyone has anything else to add? Mrs. Morrison spoke up. I just want to say what I witnessed here today, that was extraordinary. Not the fighting, the teaching. Mr. Lee, you showed everyone in this room what real conflict resolution looks like. Not through punishment or escalation or authority. Through demonstration. Through living your values instead of just talking about them. Through showing mercy to someone who didn't show you any. That's the kind of lesson educators try to teach for years and rarely succeed at. You taught it in 5 minutes. Thank you for that. I learned something today, too. We all did. The other adults in the room nodded. They had all witnessed something profound. Something that challenged their assumptions about masculinity, about strength, about how to handle conflict. They'd all come into this meeting with certain beliefs about how this would go. And they'd all been wrong. Bruce stood, helping Brandon to his feet. Linda put her arm around Brandon's shoulders. The Lee family, united, ready to go home. Frank and Tommy stood together. Father and son, both processing what had just happened, both uncertain about what came next, but both committed to being better than they'd been. Saturday morning, Frank said to Bruce, 10 a.m. We'll be there. Both of us. Ready to learn. I'll be ready to teach. And Frank, Bruce paused at the door, turned back. What you did today, admitting you were wrong in front of your son, that took real courage. Tommy learned more from watching you apologize than he ever learned from watching you fight. That's the lesson he'll remember. Not that Dad lost. That Dad was brave enough to say he was wrong. That's powerful. That's the kind of father he needs. Frank nodded, unable to speak around the emotion in his throat. Bruce, Linda and Brandon left the principal's office, walked down the hallway, through the main office, out into the late afternoon sunlight. The school grounds were empty now. Classes had ended. Children had gone home. The playground was silent. They walked to their car in the parking lot. Bruce unlocked the doors. Linda got Brandon settled in the back seat, buckled in safely. Then she turned to Bruce. "That was the most terrifying and beautiful thing I've ever seen you do." "Terrifying? He could have hurt you. I know you knew what you were doing, but Bruce, he's massive. He's trained. He was trying to hurt you. What if something had gone wrong?" "Nothing went wrong because I knew what I was doing. And more importantly, I knew what I was teaching." Brandon needed to see that his father lives by the principles he teaches. That I don't just tell him to walk away from fights. I walk away from fights. That I don't just tell him violence is the last resort. I demonstrate that by refusing to use violence even when someone attacks me. Words are cheap. Actions teach. Brandon will remember this day for the rest of his life. Will remember that his dad had every right to hit that man, every reason to hurt him, and chose not to. That's the lesson. That's what matters. Linda kissed him. "You're a good man, Bruce Lee, and a good father. Brandon's lucky to have you. I'm lucky to have him. He teaches me as much as I teach him. Today he taught me that kids are braver than adults. That choosing kindness when someone's being cruel is harder for grown-ups than for children." Brandon walked away from Tommy this morning without hesitation, without wondering if it made him look weak, without worrying about what other people would think. He just knew it was the right thing to do and did it. I want to be more like that. More like my 5-year-old son who understands that being kind is more important than being tough. They got in the car. Bruce started the engine, pulled out of the parking lot, headed home through Los Angeles afternoon traffic. In the back seat, Brandon was quiet, looking out the window, processing everything he'd witnessed. After a few minutes of silence, Brandon spoke. "Dad, why didn't you hit that man? You could have. I know you could have. I've seen you train. I've seen how fast you are. Why did you just let him try to hit you?" Bruce looked at Brandon in the rearview mirror. This was the question he'd been waiting for. The question Brandon needed to ask. The question that would determine what lesson Brandon actually learned from today. Because hitting him would have taught you the wrong lesson, buddy. Would have taught you that when someone challenges you, when someone makes you angry, when someone tries to hurt you, you hurt them back. But that's not what I want you to learn. I want you to learn that real strength is control. That real power is choosing not to use violence when you could. Mr. Mitchell threw his hardest punch at me, put all his strength into it, tried to hurt me, and I could have hit him back, could have hurt him badly. But what would that have proven? That I can hit harder than he can? So what? That's not strength. That's just violence. Real strength is what I showed you, control. Knowing exactly what he was going to do, how to avoid it, how to neutralize him without causing him pain. That's mastery. That's what 30 years of training gives you. Not the ability to hurt people. The ability to not hurt people even when they're trying to hurt you. Was I right to walk away from Tommy this morning? Really right? Or should I have pushed him back? You were exactly right. You knew you could hurt Tommy if you wanted to. I've taught you enough that you could have. But you chose not to. That choice, Brandon, that's what makes me proudest. Not your skill, your restraint, your wisdom to know that fighting should always be the last option, not the first response. Most people never learn that. Most people think strength means fighting back every time. But you know better. You know that real courage is walking away from fights you could win, because winning the fight isn't as important as choosing peace. What if Tommy had kept pushing me? What if he hadn't stopped? Linda turned in her seat to look at Brandon. Then you would have defended yourself. Your dad isn't teaching you to let people hurt you. He's teaching you that defense is different from aggression. That you protect yourself when you need to, but you don't seek out violence. You don't escalate. You don't make things worse just to prove you're tough. There's a big difference between defending yourself and attacking someone. Your dad would never want you to let someone hurt you, but he also doesn't want you to hurt people just because you can. I understand, Brandon said. I think. Bruce smiled. You understand better than most adults, buddy. Better than Mr. Mitchell did until about an hour ago. You're learning something it took him 40 years to figure out. That's wisdom. That's what I'm trying to teach you. Not just how to fight, how to think. How to be the kind of person who doesn't need to fight because you're so secure in yourself that other people's aggression doesn't threaten you. They drove in comfortable silence for a few more minutes. Then Brandon spoke again, his voice smaller now, vulnerable. Dad, am I a coward for walking away? Some of the other kids at school say I am. They say real boys fight back. They say I'm scared. Am I? Bruce felt his heart break a little. This was the damage bullying did. Made gentle children question whether gentleness was weakness. Made kind children wonder if kindness was cowardice. Made the best parts of who they were seem like flaws that needed to be fixed. Brandon, listen to me very carefully. You're not a coward. You are one of the bravest people I know. Do you know why? Because being scared and doing the right thing anyway. That's what courage is. Courage isn't not being scared. Courage is being scared and still choosing kindness. Still choosing to walk away. Still choosing not to hurt someone even when they hurt you. A coward is someone who's afraid and lets that fear control them. Makes them small. Makes them mean. Makes them hurt other people because they're scared. You're not that. You're someone who feels fear and chooses love anyway. Chooses peace anyway. Chooses to be gentle anyway. That's the opposite of cowardice. That's heroism. Really, really. And I'll tell you something else. The kids who say real boys fight back, they're wrong. They're repeating something adults taught them. Something their fathers or their friends or TV shows told them. But it's not true. Real boys, real men, are the ones who can control themselves. Who can choose not to fight when they easily could. Who can walk away from challenges to their ego because their sense of self isn't based on whether they win fights. Those are the real boys, the real men, and you're already becoming one. At 5 years old, you're already wiser than most adults. I'm so proud of you, Brandon. So incredibly proud. Brandon was crying now. Not sad crying. Relief crying. His father wasn't disappointed. Wasn't ashamed. Was proud. The thing Brandon had been most afraid of, that he'd failed his father by walking away, wasn't true. He'd done exactly what his father hoped he would do. I love you, Dad. I love you too, buddy. So much. And I'm sorry you've had to deal with Tommy's bullying. I'm sorry other kids have made you feel bad for being kind. I'm sorry the world sometimes punishes gentleness. But I promise you, the kind of person you're becoming, the kind of man you're learning to be, that's worth all the difficulty. Being kind in a world that often isn't. That's revolutionary. That's powerful. That's what changes the world. One gentle choice at a time. They arrived home 20 minutes later. Their small house in West Los Angeles, modest but comfortable, filled with Linda's artwork and Bruce's training equipment and Brandon's drawings covering the refrigerator. Home. Safe. A place where Brandon could be exactly who he was without having to prove anything to anyone. Linda took Brandon inside to get cleaned up for dinner. Bruce stayed in the driveway for a moment, sitting in the car, breathing, processing everything that had happened. His hands were shaking slightly now, adrenaline finally releasing, body finally acknowledging the stress of the confrontation, even though his mind had been calm throughout. He'd put himself at risk today, had let a trained combat veteran throw a full power punch at his head. If something had gone wrong, if Frank had telegraphed less, if the timing had been off by a fraction of a second, if Bruce's read had been incorrect, he could have been seriously hurt, could have had his jaw broken, could have been knocked unconscious in front of his son. But it hadn't gone wrong, because Bruce had known what he was doing, had spent 30 years training for exactly this kind of situation, had developed the sensitivity to read Frank's intention before Frank moved, had refined the technique to redirect force without returning it, had mastered the art of winning without fighting. And more importantly, he taught Brandon the most important lesson Bruce knew. That real strength is choosing mercy when you have power. That real courage is walking away from fights you could win. That real masculinity is knowing you could destroy someone and choosing not to. That lesson was worth the risk, was worth the confrontation, was worth everything. Bruce got out of the car, walked into his house, found Brandon in his room, changing out of his school clothes, still processing the day's events. Hey, buddy, you doing okay? Brandon nodded. I am okay. Dad, are you really going to teach Tommy martial arts? Even after he was mean to me? I am. Because Tommy's not a bad kid. He's a good kid who's been taught some bad things. And if we can teach him better things, teach him that strength doesn't mean being mean, that being tough doesn't mean hurting people, then maybe he stops being a bully. Maybe he becomes your friend instead. Would you like that? I think so. If he stops pushing me, he will. I really believe that. His dad is going to get help, going to learn how to parent differently, how to teach Tommy that real men don't need to prove they're tough. And Tommy's going to learn martial arts the right way, not as a weapon to hurt people, as a tool to build confidence, to understand his body, to know he's strong without needing to prove it by pushing other kids around. I think he's going to change. And I think you two could be good friends. Okay, but I learned something too. I learned that teaching Brandon restraint isn't just about keeping him safe. It's about giving him permission to be gentle in a world that demands aggression. It's about showing him that he doesn't have to perform masculinity the way other boys do, that he can be kind and strong simultaneously, that being gentle doesn't make him weak, it makes him wise. Brandon walked away from a fight today, and I'm prouder of that than I've ever been of any fight I've won, because he chose peace when violence was easier. He chose kindness when cruelty was expected. He chose to be himself even when other people mocked him for it. That's courage I'm still learning. That's strength I aspire to. My 5-year-old son is teaching me how to be a better man. The hardest opponent isn't another fighter. It's yourself, your ego. You need to prove yourself, your fear of looking weak. Brandon is learning to defeat that opponent already. Frank is just beginning to learn. And I'm still learning too. We're all learning. That's the real lesson. Not that I'm right and Frank is wrong. That we're all works in progress. All trying to be better than we were yesterday. All teaching our children the best we know while being open to learning better. Tomorrow I'll wake up and train. I'll practice my techniques. I'll refine my forms. But the real training happened today. Not in the gym. In the principal's office. Not in defeating Frank physically. In helping him grow emotionally. That's mastery. That's what 30 years of martial arts has really been preparing me for. Not to fight. To teach. To heal. To transform. I'm grateful for today. Grateful for the confrontation. Grateful for Frank's challenge. Grateful for the opportunity to demonstrate what I believe instead of just talking about it. Grateful that Brandon saw his father live by the principles he teaches. That's the legacy. That's what matters. Not the fights I've won. The lesson I'm passing to my son. The understanding that real men don't need to prove they're men. They just need to be good humans. Kind humans. Humans who choose love over fear, peace over violence, growth over ego. That's why I'm teaching Brandon. That's what I hope Frank learns. That's what I'm still learning myself. The journey continues. The lesson deepens. The way unfolds. Bruce closed the journal, put down his pen, sat in silence for a moment, feeling the quiet of the house around him. Linda was reading in bed. Brandon was asleep, safe, loved, learning to be the kind of man the world desperately needed. And Bruce felt at peace. Not because he'd won a confrontation, because he'd helped someone grow, had modeled for his son what real strength looked like, had lived his values instead of just preaching them. That was enough. That was everything. The next morning, Bruce woke at 5 a.m., as he always did. Linda was still sleeping. Brandon was still sleeping. Shannon, their 1-year-old daughter, was mercifully still sleeping. The house was quiet, peaceful, the kind of stillness Bruce cherished. This was his time, his moment to center himself before the day's demands began. He dressed in simple training clothes, black cotton pants, white t-shirt, bare feet. Walked quietly through the house to the garage he'd converted into a private training space. Heavy bag in one corner. Wooden dummy for Wing Chun practice against one wall. Mirrors covering another wall. Training mats on the floor. His sanctuary, the place where he refined technique, tested ideas, pushed himself past comfort into growth. But this morning he didn't train. Not physically. He sat cross-legged on the mat, closed his eyes, and breathed. Just breathed, feeling the air enter his lungs, feeling his chest expand, feeling the rhythm of his heartbeat. Meditation, stillness. The practice he'd only recently begun to understand was as important as physical training, maybe more important. Yesterday's confrontation with Frank Mitchell replayed in his mind. Not the physical part, that had been easy, instinctive, a technique practiced 10,000 times until it was reflexive. But the emotional part, the moment when Frank's worldview had shattered, the vulnerability in his voice when he'd apologized, the tears in his eyes when he'd realized what he'd been teaching his son, that transformation, that growth, that was the real victory. Not Bruce's ability to redirect a punch, Frank's willingness to change. Bruce had been teaching martial arts for 12 years now. Since he was 18, barely older than most of his students. He'd always emphasized philosophy alongside technique. Martial arts is not just about fighting. It's about self-knowledge, self-control, self-mastery. He'd said those words thousands of times to hundreds of students. But yesterday was the first time he'd truly embodied them. Not in a training scenario, not in a demonstration, in a real confrontation where someone was actually trying to hurt him, where his son was watching, where the stakes were real, and he'd chosen restraint, chosen control, chosen to teach rather than defeat. That was the test. That was what separated performing philosophy from living it. And Brandon had watched. That's what mattered most. Brandon had seen his father refuse to return violence, had seen his father control someone twice his size without causing harm, had seen his father choose mercy when revenge was available. That image, that model of masculinity, would stay with Brandon forever, would shape how he thought about strength, about power, about what it means to be a man. Bruce opened his eyes, looked at his reflection in the mirror across from him, saw a 30-year-old Chinese man, small by American standards, immigrant, foreigner, someone who'd spent his entire life in America being dismissed, underestimated, stereotyped. Chinaman, karate boy, the kung fu guy from TV. People saw his race before they saw him, saw his size before they saw his skill, assumed weakness before witnessing strength. That's what Frank Mitchell had done. I looked at Bruce and seen someone small, foreign, soft, someone teaching his son to be weak, someone who didn't understand real masculinity. Frank's racism and trauma had blinded him to what Bruce actually was, and it had taken 2 seconds of undeniable demonstration to shatter those assumptions. But how many other people carried the same assumptions? How many other fathers looked at Bruce's teaching methods, the emphasis on restraint, on walking away, on choosing peace, and thought he was making children weak? How many people believed real men had to be aggressive, violent, dominant? How many boys were being raised to think strength meant hurting people, that masculinity meant never showing vulnerability, that being a man meant never backing down from a challenge? That was the real battle, not individual confrontations with individual racists, but the cultural narrative, the story America told itself about what manhood looked like, the toxic mythology that violence equals strength, that aggression equals courage, that real men fight. Bruce couldn't change that narrative alone, couldn't reach every father teaching his son the wrong lessons, couldn't transform American culture through individual demonstrations. But he could reach the people in front of him, could teach his students, could model for Brandon, could help Frank Mitchell unlearn 20 years of trauma. One person at a time, one lesson at a time, one transformation at a time. That was realistic. That was achievable. That was enough. Bruce stood, bowed to his reflection, a habit from years of training, acknowledging himself as both teacher and student, and began his morning workout. Not fighting techniques today, just movement, flowing from stance to stance, feeling his body's capabilities, exploring range of motion, dancing with his own physicality. This was what martial arts was really about. Not defeating others, understanding yourself, your body, your mind, your spirit, integration, wholeness, the ability to be present in each moment. At 7 a.m., Linda emerged from the bedroom, Shannon on her hip, looking sleepy but amused. You're up early. Couldn't sleep? Slept fine. Just needed time to think, to process yesterday. That was quite a day. Are you really going to teach that man's son? After everything that happened? I am. Tommy's not responsible for his father's mistakes. And if I can teach him a different way, teach him that strength doesn't mean aggression, that being tough doesn't mean being cruel, then maybe he stops being a bully. Maybe he becomes a good kid. Isn't that worth trying? What if Frank doesn't change? What if this was just him being embarrassed in the moment, but nothing actually shifts? Then we deal with it. But I think he'll change. I think yesterday genuinely broke something open for him. Something that's been building for years. The anger, the violence, the belief that those things made him strong. I think he's been carrying that weight for so long that having it taken away, having someone show him a different way, that was relief. Not just defeat, actual relief. Like he'd been given permission to stop being so angry all the time. Linda kissed him. You're a good man, Bruce Lee. An optimist. You believe people can change. I hope you're right about Frank. For Tommy's sake. For Brandon's sake. Me too. Brandon emerged from his room a few minutes later, rubbing sleep from his eyes, still in his pajamas. He climbed on the couch, curled up next to Bruce, small and warm and trusting. Dad, I had a dream about yesterday. About you and Mr. Mitchell. Except in the dream, you did hit him. And it made him more angry. And he came back with more people. And it turned into this big fight. And it was scary. Bruce pulled Brandon close. That's your brain processing what happened. Understanding why I didn't hit him. Because if I'd hurt him, he wouldn't have learned anything. He would have just been angry. Would have just wanted revenge. Would have taught Tommy that I was the enemy. But because I didn't hurt him, because I just showed him his way doesn't work, he learned. He changed. That's why restraint is more powerful than violence. Violence just creates more violence. Restraint creates the possibility of growth. Will Tommy really stop being mean? I think so. I really do. But if he doesn't, if he keeps bullying you, you tell me immediately. Okay, I'm not asking you to let people hurt you. I'm just asking you to give Tommy a chance to change. One chance. If he doesn't take it, we handle it differently. But I believe he will. I believe his dad is going to help him become better. Okay, Dad, I'll give him a chance. They sat together on the couch, father and son, processing yesterday's lesson together. Linda made breakfast. Shannon played with blocks on the floor. A normal Friday morning. Except nothing felt entirely normal anymore. Everything felt slightly shifted. Like the world had tilted yesterday and was slowly settling into a new configuration. At 9 a.m., the phone rang. Bruce answered. Hello. Bruce? It's Frank Mitchell. The voice was hesitant, uncertain, nothing like the aggressive confidence of yesterday. I hope it's okay I'm calling. I got your number from the school directory. I wanted to thank you. For yesterday. For not hurting me. For teaching me something I desperately needed to learn. And I wanted to confirm, you said we could come to your school. This Saturday, 10 a.m. Is that still okay? Or did you just say that to be polite and now you're regretting it? It's still okay. I'm in it. You and Tommy are both welcome. We'll start with basics. Breathing. Stance. Understanding how your body works. It won't be dramatic. Won't be movie kung fu. Just foundational work. Learning to be present in your body. Learning to control yourself before you try to control anything external. Sound good. Sound perfect. Bruce, I call the counseling center. The one Mrs. Morrison recommended. Made an appointment for next week. For me and Tommy both. Family counseling. I'm nervous about it. Terrified, actually. But I know I need it. No, Tommy needs it. So I'm doing it. That's good. That's really good. And Frank, being terrified and doing it anyway, that's courage. Real courage. Not the kind they taught you in boot camp. The kind that actually matters. The kind that changes lives. I'm proud of you for taking that step. Frank's voice cracked. No one's been proud of me in a long time. Thank you for saying that. I'll see you Saturday. We'll be there. And Bruce, thank you. For everything. For showing me mercy I didn't deserve. For giving me hope that I can be better. For teaching me what real strength looks like. I won't forget it. Ever. They hung up. Bruce stood there holding the phone, feeling the weight of what had just happened. Frank Mitchell, ex-Marine, combat veteran, aggressive father who'd called Bruce names yesterday, was thanking him, was getting counseling, was bringing his son to learn a different way, was changing. That's what yesterday had been about. Not winning a confrontation, creating possibility, opening a door Frank didn't know existed, showing him that the path he'd been on, the path of anger and violence, and proving his masculinity through aggression, wasn't the only path. That there was another way, a better way, a way that didn't require constantly fighting the world and everyone in it. Bruce had opened that door, but Frank had to walk through it, and he was walking. That was everything. Saturday morning arrived clear and bright. Bruce opened his school at 9:30 a.m., half an hour before Frank and Tommy were scheduled to arrive. He swept the training floor, organized the equipment, made sure everything was clean, welcoming, ready for new students. June Fan Gung Fu Institute wasn't large. Just a converted storefront in Chinatown. One main training floor, a small office, a bathroom. The walls were bare except for a few framed photographs of Bruce with his teacher Ip Man and a Chinese calligraphy scroll that read "Walk On." Simple, functional, not trying to be impressive. Just a place to train, to learn, to grow. At 9:55 a.m., a truck pulled up outside. Frank and Tommy got out. Tommy was wearing a t-shirt and shorts. Frank was in jeans and a plain t-shirt, looking nervous, out of place like someone entering a foreign country without knowing the language. Bruce opened the door. "Welcome. Come Take your shoes off here." We train barefoot. They removed their shoes, entered the training space. Tommy's eyes went wide looking around, at the wooden dummy, at the heavy bags, at the mirrors, at the open floor space. "Is this where you train? Where you learn Kung Fu?" "This is where I teach. And yes, where I train." "But Tommy, Kung Fu isn't just fighting. Kung Fu means skill achieved through hard work. It can apply to anything. Cooking, painting, music, martial arts. It just means getting better at something through practice, through discipline, through dedication. That's what we're going to work on today. Not learning how to fight, learning how to be in control of yourself. That's the real skill." Frank looked around the space, taking it in. "This is smaller than I expected. I thought Kung Fu schools were big, had lots of students. Some do. Mine doesn't. I don't teach large classes. I prefer working with small groups, individual students, people who are serious about learning, not just collecting belts or showing off. Quality over quantity. That's my approach. That makes sense?" "Bruce, before we start, I need to say something. To apologize properly for what I said at the school. About you being a bad father. About teaching Brandon to be a coward. About all of it. I was wrong. Completely wrong. You're an incredible father. Brandon's lucky to have you. And I'm sorry I was too blind to see that before you had to show me. I appreciate that. And Frank, I understand where it came from. The anger, the need to prove yourself, the belief that aggression equals strength. You learned that somewhere. Probably learned it young. Probably reinforced in the military. Probably necessary for survival in combat. But it doesn't work in civilian life. Doesn't work for raising children. Doesn't work for being the kind of man you actually want to be. So we're going to unlearn it. Together. Both of you. Not overnight. Not magically. But gradually. Through practice. Through awareness. Through choosing differently. Ready to start. Tommy raised his hand like he was in school. "Mr. Lee, are you going to teach me to kick like you did? The way you moved when my dad tried to hit you? That was so fast. I want to learn that." Bruce smiled. "Eventually, maybe, but not today. Today we're learning something more important. How to breathe. How to stand. How to be present in your body. Those are the foundations. Without those, all the kicks and punches in the world are useless. With those, you don't need as many kicks and punches. You understand your body so well that movement becomes effortless. That's the goal. Not to make you into a fighter. To make you into someone who understands themselves so completely that fighting becomes unnecessary. Makes sense?" Tommy looked confused but nodded. "I think so." "Good. Let's start. Both of you, stand here in the center of the floor. Feet shoulder-width apart. Weight evenly distributed. Hands at your sides. Just stand. Feel your feet on the floor. Feel your breath moving in and out. Feel yourself present in this moment. That's the first lesson. Presence. Being here. Now. Not thinking about yesterday. Not worrying about tomorrow. Just being here. Try it." Frank and Tommy stood. Try to be still. Try to be present. It was harder than it looked. Frank's mind was racing, thinking about work, about the counseling appointment next week, about whether he was doing this right, about whether Tommy was doing this right. Tommy kept fidgeting, shifting his weight, looking around, wanting to move, to do something to learn the real Kung Fu. "Breathe," Bruce said quietly. Just breathe. Stop trying to do it right. There's no right. There's just this. Standing, breathing, being alive in this moment. That's enough. You don't need to achieve anything. Don't need to prove anything. Just be here. Feel yourself here. That's the practice. They stood for 5 minutes. Just stood. Just breathed. Just were. And slowly, gradually, the fidgeting stopped. The racing thoughts quieted. The need to do something else faded. They were just there, father and son, standing, breathing, present. Good, Bruce said after 5 minutes. That's the foundation. Everything else builds from that. The ability to be present, to feel yourself, to exist in your body without needing to perform or achieve or prove anything. Most people never learn this. They spend their whole lives thinking about the past or worrying about the future. Never actually here, never actually alive in this moment. But martial arts, real martial arts, is about now. About this breath, this step, this movement. When you're present like that, everything else becomes easy. Fighting becomes easy because you're not thinking about fighting. You're just responding instinctively. Life becomes easy because you're not worried about outcomes. You're just experiencing the process. That's the secret. That's what I'm teaching you. Not techniques. Presence. They trained for 2 hours. Not fighting. Not sparring. Not learning deadly techniques. Just basics. Stance work. Learning to shift weight smoothly. Learning to move from the center. Learning to breathe into movement instead of holding breath. Learning to feel their bodies as integrated wholes rather than collections of disconnected parts. Tommy struggled at first. 5 years old, attention span of a goldfish, wanted to do cool kicks and punches like in movies. But gradually he settled. Found something meditative in the repetitive practice. Found that trying to do it perfectly was less interesting than just doing it. Being in it. Moving his body in ways that felt new and strange, but also somehow right. Frank struggled differently. His body was tense from years of military training, from trauma carried in muscles, from anger stored in fascia. Bruce worked with him, showing him how to release tension, how to soften without losing structure, how to be strong and relax simultaneously. The military taught you to be hard, Bruce said, to be armored, to never show weakness. But hardness breaks. Rigidity shatters. Water is soft, but it's also the most powerful force on earth. Be like water. That's what I'm teaching you. Softness, that's actually strength. Flexibility, that's actually power. Does that make sense? Frank nodded, tried to internalize the concept. His whole life had been about being hard, being tough, being unbreakable. And Bruce was saying that was wrong. That softness was better. That flexibility was stronger. It went against everything Frank had ever believed. But yesterday had proven Bruce right. Frank had been hard, rigid, aggressive, and Bruce had been soft, flexible, responsive. And Bruce had won without even trying, without even fighting, just by being water. At noon, they took a break. Bruce brought out water bottles. They sat on the training mats, resting, processing. That was harder than I expected, Frank said. I thought you'd teach us to fight, how to punch, how to kick, but we barely moved. We just stood, just breathed, just shifted weight. That's Kung Fu. That's the foundation of Kung Fu. The part most people skip because it's boring, because it doesn't look impressive, because you can't show off stance work at parties. But stance is everything. Power comes from the ground, travels up through the legs, through the hips, through the core, and expresses through the hands. If your stance is weak, everything built on it is weak. If your stance is strong, everything else becomes easy. So we master stance first. Then we add movement. Then we add technique. Then, eventually we add fighting. But fighting comes last, not first. Because by the time you've mastered everything before fighting, you don't need to fight anymore. You're so aware of your body, so in control, so present, that conflict becomes obvious before it starts. You see it coming. You avoid it. You defuse it. You make it unnecessary. That's mastery, not winning fights. Avoiding them. Tommy was lying on his back on the mat, staring at the ceiling. Mr. Lee, will I be able to beat up bad guys like you did? Tommy, I didn't beat up your dad. I just showed him that fighting doesn't work when your opponent doesn't participate. That's different. And here's what I want you to understand. The goal isn't to beat up bad guys. The goal is to be so confident in yourself that you don't need to. Bad guys usually target people who look weak, who look scared, who look like victims. If you carry yourself with confidence, if you move through the world knowing you're strong, knowing you could defend yourself if you had to, most bad guys will leave you alone. They'll pick easier targets. So we're not training you to fight. We're training you to not look like someone who needs to fight. To have confidence that shows in how you stand, how you walk, how you present yourself. Makes sense? I think so. So if I learn Kung Fu, bullies will leave me alone. If you learn what I'm teaching, not just Kung Fu, but confidence, presence, self-knowledge, then yes, bullies will leave you alone. Because bullies target uncertainty. They target kids who don't know how strong they are. But if you know your own strength, if you're comfortable in your body, if you're not afraid, bullies don't bother you. They can't feed on your fear if you don't give them any. Tommy sat up. Can I ask you something? About Brandon. I was mean to him. For a long time. I pushed him. I called him names. I took his lunch. And he never fought back. Never even yelled at me. He just walked away. Why? If he knows Kung Fu like you do, why didn't he fight back? Because he understands something you're just starting to learn. That fighting back would have made things worse. Would have gotten him in trouble. Would have turned you into a real enemy instead of just someone being mean. By walking away, Brandon kept the possibility open that you two could be friends someday. That's wisdom. That's real strength. He chose long-term peace over short-term satisfaction. That's harder. That's braver. That's what I hope to teach you. Not how to fight, but why choosing not to fight is often the strongest option. Tommy looked at his father. Dad, is that true? Is not fighting stronger than fighting? Frank's eyes were wet. Yeah, buddy, it is. I didn't understand that until Mr. Lee showed me. I spent my whole life thinking strength meant hurting people before they hurt you. Being tougher than everyone else. Never backing down. But that's not strength. That's just fear disguised as toughness. Real strength is what Mr. Lee has. What Brandon has. The confidence to know you could fight and choosing not to. The wisdom to know that walking away doesn't make you a coward. It makes you smart. I wish I'd learned that when I was your age. Would have saved me a lot of pain. But I'm learning it now. We're learning it together. Okay. Tommy hugged his father. Frank held his son, both of them processing the slow transformation happening. Unlearning old lessons. Internalizing new ones. Growing. Bruce watched them, feeling the weight of this moment. This was what martial arts was supposed to be about. Not creating fighters. Creating better humans. Healing trauma. Breaking cycles of violence. Teaching children and their fathers that there was another way. They trained for another hour after the break. More stance work. More breathing. More presence. And then, at the end, Bruce taught them a simple technique. A pak saw, a slapping block from Wing Chun. Not to hurt someone. To redirect force. To move energy away from you without returning it. This is what I did to your father, Bruce said, demonstrating slowly. When he punched, I didn't try to stop the punch with force. I just redirected it. Guided it past me. Like this. Soft touch. Just enough contact to change the direction. The punch goes where I want it to go, not where the attacker wanted it to go. And because I'm not fighting force with force, I don't need to be stronger. I just need to be smarter. That's the principle. Redirect, don't resist. Guide, don't block. Be water, not stone. Stone breaks under pressure. Water flows around it. Be water. They practiced pak saw for 20 minutes. Frank and Tommy taking turns throwing slow punches, Bruce showing them how to redirect. Then Bruce had them practice on each other. Frank throwing gentle punches, Tommy redirecting. Not to hurt, not to stop Dad, just to guide the energy past him. By the end of the session, both Frank and Tommy were exhausted but energized. They'd worked their bodies in ways they'd never experienced. Not brutal military training, not aggressive fighting, just mindful movement, present physicality, integration of body and mind. Same time next week. Bruce asked as they put their shoes back on. Absolutely, Frank said. We'll be here. Both of us. This is what we needed. What I needed. Thank you, Bruce. Really. Thank you. You're doing the work. I'm just guiding. That's all a teacher can do. Show you the way. You have to walk it yourself. And you're walking. That's what matters. After they left, Bruce sat alone in his school for a few minutes, feeling quiet satisfaction. Frank Mitchell had come to Bruce as an enemy, as someone hostile, aggressive, convinced Bruce was wrong about everything. And now, 48 hours later, Frank was a student, was bringing his son, was seeking counseling, was unlearning decades of toxic masculinity, was choosing growth. That transformation, that was the real fight, not the physical confrontation, the psychological and emotional work that came after. The willingness to admit you've been wrong, the courage to change, the humility to become a student again after years of thinking you knew everything. Frank was doing that work, and Tommy was learning from watching his father do it. That was generational healing. That was breaking cycles. That was what martial arts was really for. Bruce locked up the school, drove home, found Brandon and Linda in the living room, Brandon drawing at the coffee table, Linda reading a book. Saturday afternoon. Domestic peace. Family time. How did it go? Linda asked. Good. Really good. Frank and Tommy showed up. Trained for 3 hours. They're coming back next week. Frank's also starting counseling. I think real change is happening. I think we're witnessing someone transform. That's wonderful. I'm proud of you for giving them the chance. I'm proud of them for taking it. That's the harder part. Showing up. Being vulnerable. Admitting you need help. Frank's doing all of that. That's courage. Brandon looked up from his drawing. Dad, is Tommy going to stop being mean now? I think so, buddy. I really do. He's learning the same things you learned. That being strong doesn't mean being mean. That you can be tough without hurting people. That real courage is walking away from fights. He's got a long way to go, but he's starting, and his dad is helping him. So yes, I think Tommy's going to change. And I think you two are going to be friends. Good friends, maybe. I hope so. I'm tired of being scared at school. You won't have to be scared anymore. I promise. Tommy's changing. And if he doesn't, if he goes back to being a bully, you tell me immediately and we handle it differently. But I believe in people's ability to grow. I believe in transformation. I believe Tommy can become better. And I believe his dad can too. That's what I'm betting on. Growth. Change. Possibility. Brandon went back to his drawing. Bruce sat next to Linda on the couch. She leaned against him. They sat in comfortable silence, watching their son draw, feeling the peace of a Saturday afternoon, grateful for the family they'd built, the life they were living, the lessons they were learning together. Outside, Los Angeles continued its usual chaos. Traffic, noise, millions of people rushing through their days. But inside this small house, there was stillness, presence, love, the things that actually mattered, the things worth protecting, the things worth teaching Brandon to value above all else. Bruce closed his eyes, breathed, felt himself present in this moment. This was enough. This was everything. Not fame or success or proving himself to the world. Just this. Family. Peace. The quiet satisfaction of helping someone grow. Of teaching what mattered. Of being the kind of father and the kind of man he wanted Brandon to become. That was mastery. That was the real achievement. Not the fights won. The lives touched. The transformations witnessed. The love given and received. That was enough. October 1985. 15 years had passed since that afternoon in Principal Hayes' office. Brandon Lee was 20 years old now, studying acting at Emerson College in Boston, preparing to follow in his father's footsteps but carve his own path. Taller than Bruce had been, 5'11", broader shoulders, the benefits of his mother's genetics blending with his father's. He had Bruce's intensity, Bruce's focus, but also a gentleness that was entirely his own. He sat in a small coffee shop near campus, across from a journalist named Patricia Chun who wrote for Black Belt magazine. She'd requested an interview about growing up as Bruce Lee's son, about training in martial arts, about carrying that legacy. Brandon had done dozens of these interviews over the years. Usually they were tedious. The same questions, the same expectations. Everyone wanted to know if he could fight like his dad, if he was going to be the next Bruce Lee, if he felt pressure to live up to the legend. But Patricia was different. She was Chinese-American, second generation like Brandon, and she'd opened the interview with a question no one had asked before. What's the most important lesson your father taught you that had nothing to do with martial arts? Brandon thought about it, took a sip of his coffee, looked out the window at students walking past, backpacks and textbooks, and the casual confidence of young people who thought they had forever. When he spoke, his voice was thoughtful, measured, carrying the same deliberate quality Bruce's voice had always carried. The most important lesson my father taught me happened when I was 5 years old. I was being bullied at school. There was this kid, bigger than me, older, aggressive, who'd been pushing me around for weeks, taking my lunch, calling me names, the usual stuff kids do when they're trying to figure out the pecking order. And one day, he pushed me down, hard, in front of other kids. And I had a choice. I knew some martial arts by then. Dad had been teaching me since I was 3, not to fight, but for discipline and body awareness. But I knew enough that I could have hurt this kid if I wanted to. Could have hit him back. Could have proven I wasn't someone to mess with. But I didn't. I got up and walked away. Just walked away. Didn't say anything. Didn't retaliate. Just left. Patricia was writing notes. Why? Why walk away instead of defending yourself? Because that's what my father taught me. He'd always said fighting should be the last resort. That walking away from conflicts takes more courage than staying. That real strength is controlling yourself, not controlling other people through violence. So I walked away. And this kid's father, the bully's father, found out about it and was furious. Not at his son for bullying, at me for not fighting back. He called my dad to the school, called him a bad father, said he was teaching me to be a coward, said in front of everyone, teachers, other parents, both of us kids, that real boys fight back, that I was weak, that my dad was making me soft. How did your father respond? Brandon smiled, the memory still vivid after 15 years. He made the guy an offer, told him to hit him, full power. My dad said he wouldn't hit back, wouldn't defend himself with violence, would just show everyone what real strength looked like. And this guy, he was huge, former Marine, combat veteran for Vietnam. He took the offer, threw his hardest punch at my dad's face. Full commitment, trying to hurt him. And my dad, Brandon paused, still amazed by the memory. My dad moved maybe 3 inches. Just shifted his head. The punch missed by nothing. By air. And then in less than 2 seconds, this huge aggressive man was face down on the floor, and my dad had him controlled without throwing a single punch. Without hurting him at all. Just pure control. Pure technique. It was the most incredible thing I've ever seen. What did you learn from watching that? Everything. I learned that my father practiced what he preached. That he didn't just tell me to walk away from fights. He walked away from fights. He didn't just tell me violence was the last resort. He demonstrated it by refusing to use violence, even when someone attacked him. I learned that real strength isn't about how hard you can hit. It's about knowing you could destroy someone and choosing not to. It's about having power and choosing mercy. That's what my father showed everyone in that room. And specifically, he showed me that I'd made the right choice. That walking away from the bully wasn't cowardice. It was strength, wisdom, the harder choice, the braver choice. Patricia looked up from her notes. What happened to the bully? To his father. That's the beautiful part. The father, his name was Frank Mitchell. He completely transformed. My dad's demonstration broke something open in him, made him realize everything he'd been teaching his son was wrong. That aggression wasn't strength. That violence wasn't masculinity. That real men don't need to prove they're tough. Frank started going to counseling for PTSD. Started unlearning all the trauma he'd carried for Vietnam. Started teaching his son, Tommy, the bully, different lessons. And my dad offered to teach them both martial arts. The right way, not as violence, but as self-discipline, as confidence without aggression. They trained with my dad for years. Tommy and I became best friends. Still are. He's in LA now, works as a counselor himself, specifically with at-risk youth. Teaching them the same lessons my dad taught him, that you can be strong without being violent. That real courage is walking away from fights you could win. So your father's lesson that day changed multiple lives. It changed everyone who witnessed it. Frank changed. Tommy changed. I changed. Even the teachers and administrators who were there, they saw that conflict doesn't have to end in violence. That there are other ways, better ways. My dad showed them all what real martial arts is about. not defeating opponents, transforming them, not winning fights, avoiding them, not proving you're tough, knowing you're strong enough that you don't need to prove it. Patricia was quiet for a moment, processing. That's a powerful story, and very different from how martial arts are usually portrayed. In movies, in media, even a lot of schools, it's all about fighting, about being able to beat people up. Your father taught the opposite. My father understood something most martial artists don't, that the highest expression of martial arts isn't defeating 100 opponents. It's defeating yourself, your ego, your need to prove yourself, your attachment to being seen as tough or strong or unbeatable. Once you defeat those internal enemies, external enemies become irrelevant. You're so secure in yourself that challenges don't threaten you. You're so confident that you have nothing to prove. That's mastery. That's what my father achieved. And that's what he tried to teach everyone he trained. Some people got it. Some didn't. But the ones who did, like Frank Mitchell, like Tommy, they transformed. Their whole lives changed because my father showed them a different way. Are you trying to carry on that teaching? That philosophy? Brandon shook his head. I'm not my father. I'm not trying to be. I'm pursuing acting, not martial arts instruction. But yes, I carry his philosophy. I carry the lesson he taught me that day. That real strength is choosing peace when violence is available. That real courage is walking away from fights you could win. That real power is mercy. I try to live that. Try to model it. Try to pass it on. Not through teaching martial arts, but through how I live. How I treat people. How I handle conflict. That's his legacy. Not the movies he made. Not the fights he won. The philosophy he lived. The transformation he created in people. That's what matters. That's what I'm trying to honor. The interview continued for another hour, covering Brandon's acting training, his plans for the future, his relationship with martial arts now that he was an adult making his own choices. But Patricia kept coming back to the story of Frank Mitchell and the principal's office. It was the heart of the interview, the moment that defined not just Brandon's relationship with his father, but his understanding of what strength meant, what masculinity could be, what kind of man he wanted to become. When the interview was published in Black Belt magazine 2 months later, that story became the centerpiece. The headline read, "Brandon Lee on the fight his father didn't have. Why Bruce Lee's greatest lesson had nothing to do with fighting." The article circulated, was reprinted in other magazines, was referenced in martial arts schools, was read by fathers trying to understand how to teach their sons about strength without teaching violence, was read by young men trying to reconcile cultural expectations of masculinity with their own desire to be gentle, to be kind, to choose peace. And in Los Angeles, Frank Mitchell read the article. He was 53 years old now, 15 years into recovery, 15 years into being a different kind of man, a different kind of father. He'd remarried, had a daughter with his new wife, Sarah, 8 years old, growing up with a father who'd learned how to process emotion without violence, how to be present without aggression, how to be strong through vulnerability. Tommy was 21 now, in graduate school studying social work, planning to work with veterans' families just like the counselors who'd helped Frank and Tommy 15 years ago. The cycle of trauma that could have continued, that almost certainly would have continued, had been broken by Bruce Lee, by one demonstration that lasted 2 seconds but created ripples that were still spreading 15 years later. Frank called the magazine, asked for Patricia Chin's contact information, called her, asked if she could put him in touch with Brandon. He wanted to thank him, wanted Brandon to know how much that day had mattered, how much Bruce's lesson had changed the Mitchell family forever. Patricia gave Frank Brandon's number. Frank called, left a message. Brandon called back. "Mr. Mitchell," Brandon said when Frank answered. "It's Brandon Lee. Patricia Chun said you wanted to talk." "Brandon, God, you sound so much like your father." "Yeah, I wanted to talk. I read your interview. The story about that day at your elementary school. About your dad showing me mercy, teaching me what real strength was. And I realized I never properly thanked you. Never told you how much that day meant. How much it changed my life. Changed Tommy's life. I've thought about that day at least once a week for 15 years. It was the day I started becoming someone I could actually be proud of. And I wanted you to know that. Wanted you to know your father saved my family. literally saved us. If he'd just beaten me up that day, or embarrassed me, or called the police, or handled it with violence, I would have gotten angrier, would have taught Tommy worse lessons, would have destroyed my relationship with my son. But he didn't. He showed me mercy I didn't deserve, showed me a better way. And I took it. Tommy took it. We both transformed. And it started with your dad choosing not to hurt me when he easily could have. Brandon was quiet on the other end of the line. When he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. Thank you for telling me that. My dad died when I was 8. I've spent 12 years trying to understand who he was, what he meant, what his legacy is. Everyone wants to talk about his movies, his fights, his fame. But this, what you're telling me, this is who he really was. Someone who changed lives not through violence, but through restraint, through teaching, through showing people better ways to be. That's the father I remember. That's the man I'm trying to honor. Thank you for reminding me that what I remember is real, that the lesson was real, that it mattered. It mattered more than you know. Brandon, I was drowning when I met your father, drowning in anger and trauma and toxic beliefs about what it meant to be a man. Your dad threw me a lifeline, showed me I could be strong without being violent, could be masculine without being aggressive, could be a good father without teaching my son to fight. That saved me. And I've spent 15 years trying to pass that lesson forward, working with other veterans, other fathers, other men who are where I was, angry, traumatized, teaching their kids the wrong things. I tell them about your dad, about what he showed me, about how choosing mercy is more powerful than choosing violence. Some of them listen, some transform, and when they do, I know your father's legacy is still alive, still teaching, still changing lives. They talked for an hour. Frank told Brandon about Tommy, about how he'd become a counselor, about how he specifically worked with families dealing with bullying, about how he taught kids the same lesson Bruce had taught him. That walking away takes more courage than fighting. That real strength is internal, not external. That you can be confident without being cruel. Brandon told Frank about his acting career, about trying to honor his father's legacy without being consumed by it, about wanting to be his own person while also carrying forward the philosophy Bruce had lived, about the complicated navigation of being Bruce Lee's son, everyone expecting him to be just like his father, while Brandon was trying to figure out who Brandon was. Your father would be proud of you, Frank said, not because you're trying to be him, because you're trying to be yourself while holding onto the wisdom he gave you. That's all any father wants, for his kids to learn from him, but also transcend him, to take the good and leave the bad, to become themselves. You're doing that. He'd be proud. Thank you. That means a lot, especially from someone who knew him, who saw him not as a movie star, but as a teacher, as a man trying to help people grow. That's who I want to remember. That's who I want to honor. They promised to stay in touch. Frank invited Brandon to visit if he was ever in Los Angeles. Brandon said he would. They hung up, and Brandon sat in his apartment in Boston, 20 years old, carrying his father's legacy, feeling the weight of it but also the inspiration. His father had changed lives, had transformed people, had taught lessons that were still rippling outward 15 years after he demonstrated them. That was immortality. Not the movies, not the fame, the transformations, the lives touched, the wisdom passed forward. That was worth honoring, worth protecting, worth living up to. March 1993. Brandon Lee was 28 years old, filming The Crow in Wilmington, North Carolina. The role of a lifetime, a dark, complex character, a chance to prove he was a serious actor, not just Bruce Lee's son doing martial arts movies. He was excited, energized, feeling like his career was finally becoming his own. He'd done an interview earlier that week with a documentary crew making a film about Asian American actors in Hollywood. They'd asked about his father, about martial arts, about carrying that legacy. And Brandon had told the story again, the story of Frank Mitchell, of the principal's office, of the fight his father didn't have. People remember my father for his movies, Brandon had said to the camera, for Enter the Dragon, for his martial arts skills, for his speed and power. But what I remember most is the fight he didn't have, the Marine he didn't hit, the lesson he taught without violence. That's who Bruce Lee was. Not just a fighter, a philosopher, a teacher, A father who understood that teaching your son to avoid fighting is harder and more important than teaching him to win fights. That's the legacy I'm trying to honor. Not just the martial arts, the philosophy, the restraint, the understanding that real power is control, that real courage is choosing peace, that real strength is mercy. The interviewer had been moved, had asked if Brandon could arrange an interview with Frank Mitchell, if Frank would be willing to share his side of the story. Brandon had said he'd ask. I called Frank that evening. There's a documentary crew making a film about Asian American representation in Hollywood, Brandon explained. They want to interview you. About that day at the school. About how my dad changed your life. Would you be willing to do it? Frank had hesitated. I don't know if my story matters. I'm not anyone important. Just a guy who learned an important lesson. Your story matters because it shows what my dad was really about. Not the legend, the man, the teacher, the person who changed lives through wisdom instead of violence. Please, I think people need to hear it, need to understand that martial arts isn't about fighting. It's about transformation. Frank had agreed. The interview was scheduled for April after Brandon finished filming The Crow. But Brandon didn't make it to April. March 31st, 1993. The final scene of The Crow. A night shoot. Brandon's character was supposed to be shot by a gang member. The prop gun malfunctioned. A fragment from a previous blank discharge had lodged in the barrel. When the gun was fired during the scene, that fragment became a projectile, hit Brandon in the abdomen, perforated his intestines, damaged his spine. He was rushed to the hospital, underwent 6 hours of surgery, died at 1:04 p.m. on March 31st, 1993. 28 years old. His career just beginning. His life full of possibility. Gone. The news devastated the martial arts community. Devastated Hollywood. Devastated everyone who'd known Bruce Lee and had been watching Brandon carry forward that legacy. The tragic irony wasn't lost on anyone. Bruce Lee had died young and mysteriously. And now his son had died young and tragically. The Lee family seemed cursed. Haunted, destroyed by forces they couldn't control. The funeral was held in Seattle, where Bruce had been buried 20 years earlier. Hundreds attended. Fellow actors, martial artists, students of Bruce's who'd trained with him in the 1960s and 70s. Friends, family. Linda Lee Cadwell, now 58, burying her son 2 decades after burying her husband. Shannon Lee, 24, burying her only sibling. The grief was unbearable, and standing in the back of the funeral home, trying to be unobtrusive, trying not to intrude on private grief, was Frank Mitchell. He was 61 years old now. Gray hair, weathered face, 23 years removed from that day in the principal's office when Bruce Lee had shown him mercy he didn't deserve. Tommy was 28, the same age as Brandon, working in Los Angeles as a family counselor. Sarah was 16, a junior in high school, growing up with a father who'd learned how to be gentle, how to be present, how to be strong without violence. Frank had driven from Los Angeles to Seattle. 14 hours. Left at midnight when he heard the news, arrived at dawn. He hadn't been invited to the funeral. Didn't know if his presence would be welcome. But he had to come. Had to pay his respects. Had to tell Linda what her husband had done for him. What Brandon's life, and the way Brandon had honored his father's memory, had meant. After the service, after most people had left, Frank approached Linda. She was standing near Bruce's grave, staring at the headstone, her face showing 20 years of accumulated grief. "Mrs. Lee," Frank said quietly, "I'm sorry to intrude. I'm Frank Mitchell. I don't know if you remember me." Linda turned, looked at him, and recognition dawned. The Marine. From Brandon's school. The day Bruce, her voice broke. The day Bruce showed you what real strength was. "Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry for your loss. So deeply sorry. Brandon was an extraordinary young man. And I wanted you to know, wanted you to understand what your husband did for me, for my family. That day in 1970, he saved us, changed us, made us better, and I never got to thank him. He died before I could tell him what his lesson meant. But I wanted you to know, wanted you to understand that what Bruce did that day, showing me mercy when I didn't deserve it, teaching me that real strength is restraint, giving me hope that I could be better, that changed my entire life. Changed my son's life. We're different people because of Bruce. Better people. And I've spent 23 years trying to honor his lesson, trying to pass it forward, trying to help other men learn what he taught me. I wanted you to know that. Wanted you to know Bruce's legacy isn't just movies. It's lives changed, families healed, generations transformed. Linda's eyes filled with tears. Thank you. Thank you for telling me. Bruce would be. He'd be so glad to know that. To know the lesson reached you. That lasted. That it's still teaching. He always said martial arts wasn't about fighting. It was about transformation. About making people better. You're proof he was right. I am. And so is my son. Tommy, the boy who bullied Brandon. He's a counselor now. Works with at-risk youth. Teaches them what Bruce taught us. That violence isn't strength. That real courage is walking away. That you can be tough without being cruel. He's helping dozens of kids. Maybe hundreds over his career. All because Bruce showed us a different way. That's legacy, Mrs. Lee. That's immortality. Not fame. Impact. Lives touched. Wisdom passed forward. Your husband achieved that. Your son was carrying it forward. And even though Brandon's gone, the lesson continues. Through Tommy. Through me. Through everyone Bruce taught. The lesson keeps teaching. Linda hugged him. This stranger. This man who'd been an enemy 23 years ago and was now a testament to her husband's wisdom. They stood together in the cemetery, two people bonded by grief and gratitude, both understanding that Bruce Lee's real legacy wasn't what most people thought it was. It wasn't the movies, wasn't the fame, wasn't the fighting. It was the transformation. The lives changed. The men who learned they could be strong without being violent. The fathers who learned they could teach their sons better lessons. The families healed through philosophy instead of broken through aggression. That was what Bruce Lee had given the world. And it was still giving, still teaching, still transforming. Frank stayed in Seattle for 2 days. Attended a small memorial gathering at Linda's house. Met Tommy there. Tommy had flown up from L.A. when he heard about Brandon's death, wanting to pay respects to the family that had changed his life. Father and son, both mourning a man they'd only known briefly, but who'd transformed them completely. On the drive back to Los Angeles, Frank and Tommy talked about Brandon, about Bruce, about the lesson from 1970 that had shaped both their lives. Do you remember that day? Frank asked. In the principal's office? You were 5. Do you actually remember it, or just remember me telling you about it? I remember it, Tommy said. Not every detail, but I remember you on the floor. Remember Mr. Lee standing over you, calm, not even breathing hard. Remember feeling confused because you'd always taught me that being big and strong meant you won fights. And you were big and strong and you lost. Lost to someone smaller. Lost without him even hitting you. That confused me. Made me question everything you taught me. And then you apologized. To me. To Brandon. To Mr. Lee. And you told me you'd been wrong. That everything you taught me was wrong. That real strength looked different than you'd thought. I remember that. Remember it changed everything. Changed how I thought about you. Changed how I thought about strength. Changed who I became. I'm glad you apologized. Glad you think it. If I'd doubled down, insisted I was right, taught you that Mr. Lee just got lucky, you would have become me. Angry. Violent. Alone. Instead you became you. Kind. Strong. Someone who helps people. That's all because Bruce Lee showed me mercy. Showed me a better way. I owe him everything. We both do. They drove in silence for a while. Then Tommy spoke again. Dad, do you think it's weird that both Bruce and Brandon died young? That neither of them got to grow old? It feels like, I don't know, like the universe took them too soon. Like they had more to teach and didn't get the chance. They taught plenty. Bruce died at 32. Brandon at 28. But the lessons they taught in those short lives, those lessons are still alive. Still spreading. You're proof. I'm proof. Everyone Bruce trained is proof. Everyone Brandon inspired is proof. They didn't need long lives to make an impact. They just needed to live their lives fully, authentically, in alignment with their values. And they did that. Both of them. That's why we remember them. That's why we're mourning. Not because of what they could have done, because of what they did do. The lives they touched, the transformations they created. That's enough. That's everything. Tommy nodded. I'm going to tell their story. In my work, with the kids I counsel, with the families I help. I'm going to tell them about the day Bruce Lee showed my dad mercy, about how that changed us, about how real strength is choosing not to fight, about how real courage is walking away, about how real power is transformation, not domination. That's how I honor them, by passing forward what they taught us. That's how we both honor them, Frank said, by being better than we would have been without them, by teaching what they taught, by living the philosophy they modeled. That's legacy. That's how they stay alive. Through us, through everyone they changed, through the ripples that keep spreading outward from that one moment of mercy. They drove the rest of the way in companionable silence. Father and son, both transformed by Bruce Lee, both mourning Brandon Lee, both carrying forward a lesson learned 23 years ago that was still teaching, still healing, still changing lives. In 2008, 15 years after Brandon's death, Tommy Mitchell published a book. It was called The Fight That Never Happened: What Bruce Lee Taught Me About Real Strength. It told the story of that day in 1970, of Frank's aggression, of Bruce's restraint, of the 2-second confrontation that changed the Mitchell family forever, of Brandon carrying forward his father's philosophy, of how one lesson in mercy had created ripples that spread across decades and generations. The book became a quiet bestseller, not a blockbuster, not a phenomenon, but steady sales, consistent interest. It was assigned in counseling programs, read by martial arts instructors, shared by fathers trying to teach their sons better lessons than they'd been taught, used in veteran support groups, discussed in men's circles focused on redefining masculinity. And everywhere it went, it taught the same lesson. Real strength is choosing mercy when you have power. Real courage is walking away from fights you could win. Real masculinity is control, not aggression. Real power is transformation, not domination. That was Bruce Lee's legacy. Not Enter the Dragon, not the movies, not the fame, not the mystique. The lesson, the transformation, the lives changed, the families healed, the men who learned they could be strong without being violent, the fathers who learned they could teach their sons better ways, the children who learned that walking away from fights takes more courage than staying. That lesson was still teaching. 40 years after Bruce demonstrated it, 20 years after Brandon honored it, the lesson kept spreading, kept transforming, kept healing, because real wisdom doesn't die when the teacher dies. It lives on, in the students, in the stories, in the lives changed, in the ripples spreading outward in infinite circles. That's immortality, not fame, not legend. Impact. Bruce Lee impacted Frank Mitchell in 2 seconds on October 14, 1970. That impact spread to Tommy, spread to the families Tommy counseled, spread to the readers of his book, spread to their children and their children's children. One moment of mercy, one choice to teach instead of punish, one demonstration that lasted 2 seconds but created ripples that would last forever. That was real power. That was real strength. That was real mastery. Not the fights won, the fights that never happened, the violence avoided, the transformation chosen instead of domination. That was Bruce Lee's greatest lesson, and it was still teaching. In 2020, 50 years after that day in the principal's office, Linda Lee Cadwell was 85 years old. She'd outlived her husband by 47 years, had outlived her son by 27 years, had carried their memories, their legacies, their lessons for half a century. She received a package in the mail from Tommy Mitchell, now 65 years old, retired from counseling, living in San Francisco with his wife and grandchildren, but still telling the story, still teaching the lesson. The package contained a photograph, taken by someone in Principal Hayes' office on October 14, 1970. A photograph Linda had never seen before. It showed Bruce and Frank shaking hands. Bruce calm, centered. Frank's face showing confusion, transformation, the beginning of understanding. And in the background, visible over their shoulders, were 2 5-year-old boys, Brandon and Tommy, sitting next to each other on chairs, both watching their fathers, both learning what real strength looked like. There was a note with the photograph. "Mrs. Lee, I found this photograph in my father's belongings. He died peacefully last month at age 88. Among his possessions were dozens of books on martial arts, on philosophy, on mindfulness. In this photograph, he'd kept it for 50 years. On the back, in his handwriting, it says, October 14th, 1970. The day Bruce Lee saved my life by showing me mercy I didn't deserve. The day I started becoming someone I could be proud of. Never forget. He never did forget. He told that story hundreds of times. Thousands, maybe. To other veterans. To his counselors. To his family. To me. To my children. To my grandchildren. That story shaped our entire family. Made us who we are. Taught us what real strength means. Your husband changed my father. Your son inspired my father. And through my father, they changed me. And through me, they're changing my children. The lesson keeps teaching. The ripple keeps spreading. Thank you for sharing them with the world. Thank you for carrying their memory. Thank you for being the foundation that made their wisdom possible. With eternal gratitude and deepest respect, Tommy Mitchell. P.S. I've enclosed the second edition of my book. It now includes a chapter about Brandon. About his interview in 1985, where he told this story. About how he honored your husband's legacy not through violence, but through storytelling, through living the philosophy, through choosing peace. That's how we honor them now. By living what they taught. By being better than we would have been without them. By choosing mercy. Always mercy. Linda held the photograph. Looked at her husband shaking hands with his former enemy. Looked at her son in the background, 5 years old, learning the lesson that would define his short life. Both of them gone now. Both of them taken too soon. Both of them living on through the people they transformed. She put the photograph in a frame. Placed it on the mantle next to photographs of Bruce and Brandon. The three images together. The past. The legacy. The impact. And she understood, finally, fully after 50 years, what Bruce had always tried to teach her. That immortality isn't about living forever. It's about the ripples you create. The lives you touch. The transformations you witness. The wisdom you pass forward. Bruce had created those ripples. Brandon had carried them forward. And 50 years later, they were still spreading. Still teaching. Still transforming. That was enough. That was everything. That was the real legacy. Not the movies. Not the fame. Not the legend. The fight that never happened. The mercy chosen instead of violence. The lesson taught in 2 seconds that would teach forever. That was Bruce Lee. That was Brandon Lee. That was the wisdom they'd given the world. And the world was still learning from it.